Good afternoon. Welcome to the 2022 Campus Compact Mid-Atlantic Service Learning and Civic Engagement Conference. My name is Anthony Wagner, and I serve as Associate Director for CCMA. On behalf of the CCMA Board and the 2022 SLCE Conference Planning Committee, I would just like to express tremendous gratitude for the engagement and passion that you each bring in advancing the public purposes of higher education. I would also simply say thank you for joining us this afternoon and tomorrow, I hope, to participate in what promises to be a thought-provoking, invigorating, and action-oriented conversation. Before we get started with the 2022 SLCE Conference Keynote address, I would like to take care of a few housekeeping items. As you are able, we invite you to please change your name in Zoom to include your name, the institution or the organization you represent, and your pronouns, similar to my name is on Zoom. This session is being recorded and will be made available on CCMA's website after the close of the conference. Live transcription is available, and I will turn that on before our keynote speaker begins. Throughout all sessions, we ask that you please mute your microphones and keep them muted while speakers are presenting. We encourage you to use the chat feature to communicate with colleagues, new and old, and to ask questions during each session. The title of this year's conference is Our Unfinished Work, Creating Equity Through Service Learning and Civic and Community Engagement. Tomorrow, the conference schedule is as follows. 2 sessions will be offered concurrently from 10 o'clock to 11:30 a.m. One focused on student speakers representing institutions from throughout the Mid-Atlantic region, and the other, co-facilitated by CCMA, focused on institutionalizing a culture of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion on our campuses. 2 sessions will also be offered concurrently from 1 o'clock to 2:30 p.m. tomorrow afternoon. One focused on faculty issues related to the conference theme, which will include faculty member speakers, and the other focused on community engaged practitioner reflections on how to advance equity through our work, including representatives from the College of Southern Maryland and the Raritan Valley Community College, returning an incarcerated student education program. And finally, we're delighted to say that from 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock p.m. tomorrow, Shirley Sagawa, a founding architect behind the creation of AmeriCorps and President Joe Biden's nominee to serve on the board of the Corporation for National Community Service, will be presented with the 2021-2022 William A. Britt Kerwin Engaged Leader Award by CCMA's board chair, Dr. Ron Nowacek. Ms. Sagawa will then share a few remarks and engage in a guided Q&A with participants. You should have received all of this in a full program with Zoom links for each session. Each session has a different Zoom link. If you've not received that, please send me a message in the chat. And finally, it's not too late to invite your colleagues, friends, students, professors, community partners, anyone to attend this session. Feel free to share the program so that they can participate as well. Now, without further ado, it is my great pleasure to pass the microphone to Madeline Yates, who will introduce today's keynote speaker. Madeline is the founder and executive director of Campus Compact Mid-Atlantic.
Thank you, Anthony, and welcome to all. I am truly delighted to see so many long-standing, longtime colleagues and friends of our network, as well as many new faces that might be attending our SLCE conference for the very first time. I now have the pleasure and privilege of introducing our incredible keynote speaker, Dr. Shawntay Stocks. However, before I do so, I would like to give a few words of thanks. This conference would clearly not be possible without the generous time, ideas, and support of our 2022 SLCE Conference Planning Committee. This year's committee was composed of representatives from across our network and region, including Sarah Marenko from the College of Southern Maryland, Daniel Koshkapazi from the University of Baltimore, Susan Serra from the University of Delaware, Patrick O'Brien from Frostburg State, Firuz Kidani from American University, Latea Burrows from the University of Baltimore, Delaney Bluebaugh from Frostburg State, and Faith Davis from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Thank you. We really appreciate your guidance, your vision, and I would also like to thank CCMA staff members who have been working incredibly hard to pull all of this off, especially what we hope will be our last virtual conference. Looking forward to conferences in person in the future. Asati Ahmed, Nisa Burns, Kate McGeehan, Karen Abma, and of course, Anthony Wagner, who served also as the wind beneath our wings to pull this off. So thank you to all. For all of those who have registered, including those of you who generously made donations to support this conference and all of our CCMA programming, I would like to give you a special word of thanks as well. And also acknowledge yet again, Dr. Alan Penchek, who annually donates an enormous amount to make our work possible, our network's most impactful supporter, but every single contribution helps to make our mission possible and put legs on our work for community change and social justice. Thank you to each speaker participating in this year's conference for sharing your experiences and providing insight on how we, as a network of nearly 40 colleges and universities, can collectively create and sustain a culture of equity through service and work within and beside our communities. And for now, our 2022 keynote speaker, Dr. Shawntay Stocks. Dr. Stocks serves as Assistant Director of Fellowships and Community Engagement for Inheritance Baltimore at Johns Hopkins University. She has over a decade of experience in service and community-based learning, coordinating diversity programs, and teaching. Dr. Stocks' work with Inheritance Baltimore at Johns Hopkins is a reparations-focused program for humanities education and art-based public education in Black Baltimore. Additionally, her engagement with the Center for Social Concerns Community-Based Learning Program focuses on providing opportunities for student volunteerism and community engagement. Dr. Stocks obtained her bachelor's degree in history from Guilford College, a master's degree in English and African American literature from North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, and her PhD in the Language, Literacy, and Cultural program at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Her dissertation research focused on faculty diversity within higher education. Dr. Stocks is trained in critical participatory action research, which she utilizes in planning and facilitating training in areas of diversity, equity, inclusion, and community-based learning. Dr. Stocks writes and often uses poetry as a reflective tool within her workshops and trainings. I'm incredibly proud and honored to say that Dr. Stocks was the recipient of the inaugural CCMA JEDI CCE. That's a long acronym, so I'm going to introduce it here. Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Civic and Community Engagement Award, given in December of 2021 in recognition of her contributions to the institutionalization of equity and civic and community engagement within the culture of Johns Hopkins University. Her tireless efforts in developing partnerships have catalyzed faculty and student equity-focused work within the greater community. The title of Dr. Stocks' keynote address is Just Community Engagement. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Shawntay Stocks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Madeline, for that. I am very honored and excited to be with you all today, and also to see so many people that I've worked with over the years as well through Campus Comeback. So hello, everyone, and welcome. And I'm going to jump right in. Today, I'm going to share my story. And when I share my story, I'm going to put concepts to the different time periods of my journey through community service, service learning, community-based learning, and use that as a tool for communal reflection today. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Actually, I'm going to stop my share and then I'm going to put it at the beginning so you can see the beginning. All right, now we're ready. Let's rock and roll. All right. As we're going into this, I want you to listen to this quote by Bell Hooks, rest her soul. Dominated culture has tried to keep us afraid, to make us choose safety instead of risk, sameness instead of diversity, moving through that fear, finding out what connects us, reveling in our differences. This is the process that brings us closer, that gives us a world of shared values, of meaningful community. Think on that as we move forward. I'd like to share the land acknowledgement of Campus Compact. Campus Compact Mid-Atlantic is located at Hood College, which sits on the traditional homeland of the Tuscarora and Piscataway Conoy peoples. Acknowledging truth and history is an essential part of creating a culture of honor and respect across all barriers of heritage and difference. We invite you to consider the difficult history of violence, displacement, migration, and structural oppression that has brought us to where we are today. Through our organization's commitment to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, we look forward to meaningfully and intentionally supporting our Indigenous communities. It's important for us to acknowledge, to make visible the invisible. And all too often in our communities, our Indigenous communities are not recognized. And so land acknowledgements are a way to begin that conversation, to share recognition, and to acknowledge both past and current practices. As we're moving through our talk today, I want us to think about operating in cultural humility. You may hear some things that might jar you a bit, but in our work with community-based learning, service learning, civic engagement, when we practice cultural humility, it really gives us a framework to work through understanding and working with communities and with each other. So we're going to think about commitment to ongoing self-evaluation in this work, in our work, both within our campuses and within our communities. Acknowledge and address power imbalances, work for systemic change, and advocate with communities, communities internally and communities externally. So let's begin our stories. Picture me, maybe 1989, wanting to do work. My aunt told me, you have to get out of the house this summer. I'm 13 years old in Baltimore City, trying to figure out what I'm gonna do. She's like, you're too young to get a job, so you're gonna do something. And I was like, guess I'll just do community service, right? I'll just volunteer. So back then, I started volunteering at an early age, 13, with an organization in Baltimore, working with elders who had ability differences. And so while I was working there, I don't recall getting any training in terms of a framework for community service. I didn't get any training in terms of thinking about community engagement. I don't recall the term service learning then. I didn't think about the hyphen between service and learning. What I thought about was I just wanted to do good. I wanted to give back to my community. I wanted to be involved. I wanted to make a difference because making a difference felt good. It felt right. And that was just something we were supposed to do. So at an early age, my framework for this work was very much in the charity model, the helping model, the giving back, being a good citizen. And that followed me into high school, where I did community service all throughout high school. But again, from the charity model, it felt good for us to work within Baltimore City. And it's where I come from. So I'm giving back to my community, to my city. And that felt good. And so I wrote very much from that way when I engaged in service, and I served from that way, very much a one direction. And that was so interesting because the people I was often serving with were neighborhoods that I'd been in, but I still had that same model because I hadn't been taught anything else yet. And I start here to say that when we're in this work, we have to meet people where they are. If there is a lack of exposure, if there is a lack of access that has been there historically, then that's where we start. Because I had respect for my elders, I had my familial values and cultural values that came there. And that's what I utilized when I went in. That's what I utilized for service. Didn't yet have a framework. But when I got to college, I began to work with the Bonner Scholars Program, and that changed my vision of doing this work. It changed the way I thought about serving with communities. It made me think about the hyphen between service and learning. It made me think about what was going on with me, as well as what I was learning from the community. It gave me a greater sense of contextualization in this work. And so now that I no longer looked at it in a one-dimensional way, I no longer looked at it as, oh, helping those people, right? People became, before the situation, more people-centered language, no longer just the helping model, but serving with, serving alongside. So yes, I still thought that it was morally right and just to do this work, but then I started thinking about, in different situations, why I even need to do this work. Like, so what's going on with our systems and our structures that has required for this to become a need in the first place? And that was the beginning of those type of questions where I really thought about, okay, what do I want to do to be a part of the change that's going to happen within different systems? And that was during undergrad. Once I finished, I became the Bonner Scholars Program Coordinator. And I was so excited to now be a practitioner in the work that I learned about. I now was training 80 Bonners a year to do the same thing that I was doing. And again, remembering to meet people where they are, to meet people who just said, I just want to serve. And to move from I just want to serve to I also want to learn. I'm serving, I'm learning with communities. I'm building my knowledge and my skills and my abilities alongside communities. And so it was a great opportunity. And I thought we were doing great work. And I remember sitting in a meeting with community partners, and all of a sudden, a community member jumped up and said, I don't understand why you are sending these white students into Black communities and they don't have any racial understanding. And I was just like, oh. And then he proceeds to say, and you too, sister, you're not from here, you don't know us. And I was like, oh, well, you're right. I'm not from here, but I do want to learn. I want to sit down and listen. And I went through a training, and I have the title here, for a weekend, Undoing Racism with the People's Survival Institute and beyond, because we really wanted to address the racial, the structural, the systemic differences. We wanted to be able to learn ourselves so that then we can also likewise learn with our students and sharing this work. And that training was quite interesting to do alongside community partners, alongside faculty and staff in the same room, deconstructing our experiences, being able to talk about what it meant to be Black, what is Black culture, what it meant to be white, to see people struggle with racial identity, and then to think, how does this impact the work that we do? But the struggle is what we had to do. Our community partner called us to task. And in answering that call, we made a commitment to sit down and get trained. So then that we, as practitioners in this work, could likewise sit down and train our students, train our faculty who want to work with community as well. And so that also worked with the shift of moving from charity to the justice model. Language. I love this quote by Desmond Tutu. Language is very powerful. Language does not describe reality. Language creates reality it describes. And so when I'm thinking about this work, when I'm now a practitioner and now I'm teaching people about this work, thinking very concretely about how we talk about the work that we do, thinking very concretely about people-centered language, thinking about modeling, thinking about those things in the work that I was to do and the responsibility that it required in working with our students. As a practitioner in the academy, here's another quote, again by Bell Hooks. The academy is not paradise, but learning is a place where paradise can be created. The classroom, with all its limitations, remains a location of possibility. In that field of possibility, we have the opportunity to labor for freedom, to demand of ourselves and our comrades an openness of mind and heart that allows us to face reality even as we collectively imagine ways to move beyond boundaries, to transgress. This is education as the practice of freedom. And that quote just sat with me because we have such awesome opportunities. Those of us in the academy who teach, those of us who are practitioners, who support faculty to really work with our students and thinking about our work that we do, to think about it transformatively, to think about its impacts. So we're taking our knowledge and skills and ability, we're taking what we're learning and we're moving our thoughts from action. And so inside of our paradises, I'm going to speak from my practitioner story here again. Inside of these possibilities, sometimes we have to look internally and not just externally from our campuses. And we have to think about, as we're sending our students out to work with community, what does our campus community feel like within itself? And how are we working for equity and justice within our departments, within our institution? How does it feel to be on the campus? And I hesitated to share this particular story, but I think it's important in thinking about our learning on a continuum. I was a staff member at a college. I was a new staff member, and a student had been recommended to me, and that student came to me and said, you know what? I want to start a Black student organization. And I was like, you want to start a Black student organization? It was a predominantly white institution. And the student said to me, I feel like a pea in white milk. And I was like, okay, that's rough. But I said to her, then that wouldn't be a good idea in this campus climate. It would be better to start a multicultural society, because with a multicultural society, that would be more welcoming to some people. That would make people feel more comfortable. Talking about Blackness for some people, having a Black student organization may feel separatist, may feel like isolating, whereas a multicultural society would feel more celebratory. It would feel more inviting. And I kick myself now where I am, because that student came to me asking to talk about a Black experience, asking for a safe space to exist as a Black person on that particular campus and talk about with other Black students what it meant to be Black. But again, being new to the campus, being new to the position, I thought I was protecting the student, mentoring the student in how to survive at that particular institution. And I've lamented over that. But again, we serve where we are, we serve through who we are. And based upon the campus climate there at that time, that was my assessment, a multicultural society where we can talk about racial issues inside of it, but it wouldn't seem like we were trying to be separate. Although there are opportunities when we do need to separate and discuss, where we do need to have race-based conversations that we don't have to worry about offending someone else when we're trying to learn on our journey, where we can just say, this is how it feels. Like she said to me, I feel like a pea in white milk. So she was looking for an opportunity to talk about that. And she and I did outside of a larger conversation. And then we began to have larger conversations about that. But even within that particular environment, I was like, okay, this is a predominantly white institution. Then we also need our white students to talk about what it means to be white. We need white students to think about race, to think about culture, the weight of thinking about racism, to think about structural issues, structural inequities is not just on people of color, right? To think about the context in which we live. And this is before the Black Lives Matter movement. This is before people became more comfortable with situating themselves specifically in conversations where it was comfortable to say, I need to talk about being Black. Black Lives Matter, and this is important. It was prior to that, because historically we've gone from talking about multiculturalism, thinking about, what is it, the tossed salad? Wasn't that the image we used to live? We're just this wonderful mixed bowl. You know, we're gonna think about multiculturalism in a very general celebratory sense, but we're not gonna get into the nuances of it. Even within diversity, we can hide the dynamics of this that we need to talk about because it's just like, it can be uncomfortable. And so that's what I was doing because that's where we were at that particular time. And so I like I said, I kicked myself for that particular part of the story because when our students tell us what they want to talk about, we need to listen and meet them there. When our community partners tell us, I had a community partner tell me, how are your students? We talk about race here. Are your students going to be comfortable talking about race? We talk about class here. Are your students going to be comfortable talking about class? So these are things that we have to prepare our students for as they're working with and partnering with communities. Also, while I was there, I became connected with Campus Compact for the first time. And it was exciting because I had an opportunity to meet and plan service learning and to talk about service learning, to talk about academic, co-curricular service learning with other practitioners. And then we started planning the Service Learning and Civic Engagement Conference, which you all are a part of. And I was excited to have a community of practice, to be able to talk about the diversity within service learning. And it was actually one of the first times I delivered one of my diversity workshops was in a Service Learning and Civic Engagement SLCE conference. But being excited with people of like minds who wanted to talk about race, who wanted to talk about diversity, who wanted to talk about that in vein with this work and how we partner across difference. It was so exciting for me to be a part of that community and to continue to be a part of that community because communities of practice really sharpens our skills. We're able to sit down and learn with each other from people who are additionally doing this work. So it was an exciting opportunity to start and to continue. As I mentioned, there are going to be highs, there are going to be lows in this work. But again, even being gentle with yourself, because the work that we do, it's about lifelong learning. We don't just arrive. I can tell you how many trainings I've been to, how many peer-reviewed articles I've read, how many books I've read on community-based learning, on culture, on diversity. And I'm still not done. There's still more learning to do because every new community partner, every new course, every new opportunity, we're still learning with our partners, we're learning with our students as we co-construct knowledge together, as we learn from each other. And when I'm in a classroom, I'm not the sage on the stage, right? I'm a facilitator of the learning process. I'm excited to be there. I'm excited to give, and I'm excited to receive. So that's an exciting part of the work that we do to positioning ourselves as lifelong learners. I'm sure many of you have seen this before. When you think about what equality is, we all get the same thing, right? We're all treated the exact same way. And then when you look at equity, when we get what we need, and let me move this so you can see the last one. And then liberation, where you don't have a barrier, where there's full participation and full access. There's nothing keeping us away from participating equally and equitably. We can all see there's nothing in the way for us getting there and obtaining goal. Now, this is still very much ideal in most situations, but it's an ideal for which we can work towards. And now thinking of myself in the position of a community partner and what it takes in terms of partnering with communities, thinking about partnering equitably with our partners, thinking about how our partners are within our courses, within our institutions in terms of co-creation of knowledge, in terms of transparency of what we have to offer and what we don't have to offer in terms of the deliverables. It's important. Where does the knowledge reside? Different ways of knowing. When we're partnering with community, I always say our community organizers, our community people who have been working in their community for years, They might not have the academic PhD, but they have the metaphorical PhD in their communities in terms of they know what's there, they know where the landmines are, and there's so much to teach you. And it might not be said in the same academic language that we might use. It might be said more in a regional vernacular way sometimes, but that doesn't matter. But what matters is listening to the knowledge, be it oral history, be it community griots, listening to what communities have to say to us, right? Putting ourselves down, again, not being the sage on the stage, definitely from a point of humility and saying the answers lie in community. They don't always lie behind the ivory tower, they lie with community. And communities know how to solve their problems. And so thinking about what knowledge looks like is important in the work that I've done and to reflect on. Oops. Context. Remembering that a single statistic does not tell the whole story. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland, born and raised. And if you've heard some of the things that I've heard over the years about Baltimore, I mean, it's the narrative, the dominant narrative about my city is one of violence, is one of a lack of culture, right? But it's like a depravity. But if you're from Baltimore and you know that area, then you know all of the vast cultural awesomeness that lies there, be it museums, be it communities, you know, our music. I talked to a student, she's like, I've never heard of club music before. I was like, yeah, that's so Baltimore. You know, oh, I've never been to the Great Blacks and Wax Museum. You haven't? You know, because people make assumptions about a particular place, and then that's assumptions provide barriers, forcing them out, forcing them with fear to not explore. And so thinking about context, especially when we're serving, where are we going? What are we learning? What are we doing? And I remember when that community partner sat me down and called me out, because just because I was Black and from Baltimore. I wasn't Black and from Greensboro, North Carolina. I did not know the history of that particular part of the city. I did not know the relationship of our college with that particular part of the city. So I did have to be quiet because I couldn't essentialize, well, I'm Black, you know, so I got it. No, I had to sit down and listen. I had not been there. I was not raised there. So I needed people to tell me what it felt like in their community and what their community need. Not a context of, oh, this is Southern little quiet town, so, you know, it's probably all good. But what did the community members say? What are they saying? And what do I need to learn and unlearn about this particular part of the city, this particular part of the South? So, transformation, the work that we do, the goal is, of course, to transform. Our difference, thinking about our agency and asking ourselves, okay, thinking about my KSAs, my knowledge, skills, and abilities, what can I as Shawntay do? Because I often say that people say that there's no I in team, but there's an I in unity, there's an I in community, because there's that. And we have to start with that I. We have to explore our own identities. We have to unpack ourselves in this work so that it makes it easier as we're working across differences, be it class, be it orientation, be it ability, be it race. If we are comfortable with understanding those different aspects of ourselves, areas where I'm privileged, and I acknowledge that, areas where I'm marginalized, right? Thinking about ourselves intersectionally is so important in the work that we do. And I'm a workshop person. So I brought you here, but you're gonna have to do some work with me. So right at this point, we have the awesome opportunity to go in breakout rooms with one another, to talk about and reflect on how do we use our agency to transform systems. The questions is going to be placed in the chat room, and you're only gonna be in there for about 8 minutes. But while you're there, because I can't tell you to turn to your neighbor and talk to your neighbors at the table. So I'm going to send you to breakout rooms where you think about how you use your agency, your positionality, that I in unity to transform systems. And it's great because you're going to be with people of different positionalities, be it a community partner, a student, a faculty, a staff, a practitioner. So you get to hear different stories in 8 minutes. Do you want me to do it, Anthony? or?
I have it ready. So
All right,
I,
ready to go.
all right. I will open all the rooms and we'll have 8 minutes, correct? Dr.
Yes.
Stocks? Excellent.
Yep.
All right.
All right. Welcome back. I believe we're waiting for a few more of our group members, but I'm about to be nosy. I would really like to know, thinking about the I in unity, thinking about the I in community, what are ways that you stand in the gap in terms of transforming systems? And so I didn't tell you that you'd be sharing out, but I'd like a few people to share out by way of reflection.
Being recorded.
By way of reflection. So since I prompted Leslie, I'm going to ask her to start in terms of on her campus, how she individually kind of stands in the gap or with also her position.
Great. Yes. So I am the executive director of North Carolina Campus Compact. And so I shared about our focus on the civic engagement side of the work, specifically political engagement. And so we work with our 38 campuses to provide knowledge and resources related to being engaged in politics, being engaged in elections, civil discourse and dialogue, media literacy, as well as just understanding the systems and free speech and all sorts of ways that folks are trying to threaten our rights and weaken our democracy and our voice. And so that's just a different pathway to transformation and change that we try to support folks in.
Thank you. And I'm going to call on some people. I know if we don't have any volunteers. Abby.
I think we came back from the breakout. What are we just discussing what we discussed? So our group really focused on kind of getting to know each other a little bit, but really trying to see within each of our programs where some of this work intersects. So, for me at MICA, we were talking about just the mandate of what the Center for Creative Citizenship does and our role within Baltimore City. And then I had 3 colleagues from different parts of University of Maryland. And so trying to think about within each of our programs, how we're really thinking about transforming the paradigms of higher education to be more accountable and accessible to the communities that we serve. And thanks, Shawntay. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thank you. Anyone else in terms of how your organization or you individually specifically are standing in the gap in transforming systems?
I can share from our group, and this is something
Thank you, Charlotte.
Yeah, our group talks a lot about identity and how in order to transform systems, we first have to acknowledge and move forward from a place of understanding who we are in those systems and how showing up in those places affects the systems and feeds the systems. So we had a long, really good conversation about how we guide students and how we kind of work through our own intersecting identities ourselves.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I put in the chat too, naming it, because sometimes it's there, but people don't want to talk about it. People don't want to name it. And that can be so insidious when you feel it and you know what's going on, but no one's talking about it. And so that's so important is to name it, to call it out. Absolutely. Anyone else? All right, I'm going to move on. And again, it is very exciting in terms of being able to be in a place, in a space with people of different positionalities within the institution and within the community and have these conversations. Because often we talk to our peers and our colleagues or faculty might talk to faculty, but how often do we all get to talk to each other from our different seats, right? All right, I'm gonna share my screen one last time before we move on to Q&A. And it's really just my closing in terms of thinking about one of the most vital ways to sustain ourselves is by building communities of resistance, places where we know we are not alone. And so in those communities of resistance, be it internally within our institutions because of the different work that we do need to do in our departments, the different disciplines, but also the work with community. When we sustain ourselves by building communities of resistance, communities of understanding, where when a person asks for, this is what I need, then we listen and address that need rather than say conform or say, you know what, that's gonna make someone uncomfortable. But sitting in that aspect of being uncomfortable and saying, okay, what's going on here and how can we change it for the better, and standing in the gap. So I know that it is 3:55 and I'm only leaving about 5 minutes for questions if there are any questions. So I'll pause. All right. Is there questions in the chat?
Asati, you have your hand up.
Oh,
Well,
okay.
I do. Dr. Stocks, thank you so much. One of the things in your presentation that really struck me was just how your story related to where you are now. And I grew up in a community and in a school, a private school, where it was very much that tossed salad. It was everyone from everywhere. And in the effort to recognize the diversity, being an African-American girl, I was the only African-American girl in my class since second grade. So in your work, what have you found to be most useful in addressing that? And like you said, there's these things that are unspoken that need to be spoken. Like, what are some of the first steps?
Definitely finding collaborators. And the story I shared with the young lady who asked me, that she wanted to start a Black student union, like listening to the students, listening to yourselves and finding connectors and collaborators and safe spaces where you do feel like you can share your frustrations, share who you are, share your concerns. That is definitely the first step, and acknowledging it and not having to feel like you have to push that down for politeness, right? For respectability politics. But if you are feeling something, then saying it, because if not, then it builds up. And that lack of addressing will then eat you on the inside rather than having a safe space to get it out. Not denying your truth, right? To be the get along to go along. And also sometimes not wanting to be put into that stereotype, right? As the angry Black woman. Well, if it's a microaggression, I'm now going to address that microaggression and let you know that I felt that. You may not have meant it that way, but this is the way in which it came across. And putting it out there rather than keeping it in. From experience, it feels better. It doesn't always have a soft landing, but it's better to address it. All right, I will turn it back over to Anthony and Madeline. Thank you for that question.
well, I actually have a question, Dr. Stocks,
Sure.
that might lead us into the rest of the conference, but we're really interested, as you are, in institutionalizing a culture of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion on our campuses. And so how do we have these conversations with the people at the top, the change makers, the decision makers, the policy makers? How do we take it? It's, of course, we're individuals in our communities, but how do you and how should we all approach this with those people as well?
Wow. I would say that in a lot of institutions is quite aspirational. And I will also say that sometimes, again, because people exist and live in departments, that might be department specific, because some supervisors are not comfortable with having these conversations. So it would really start with, again, building a community of people who are comfortable with having it, because there's presence in numbers, and having that collaboration, and then working to network across departments, across disciplines, where other people are saying that this is important, that we want to do this. And so that it's not just, okay, this group of people are unhappy and they're doing less, and so let's do some superficial thing to address this, but more so thinking about structures and policies, and then having data. That is so important too. Surveys that show that, okay, we say we are welcoming, but our climate and our students are saying this, right? So I would say collaborations, connections, community, and also data.
Mhm.
People respond, especially people up here, as you say, or maybe you didn't do that, but some of the supervisors respond to data. And our students are very powerful too. Sometimes I think students forget that student voice is very powerful. And so working across that, faculty, students, staff, that too could be powerful. And I do understand that institutional change does not happen overnight. And so people sometimes get frustrated because they're not seeing immediate changes, but that doesn't mean that you stop fighting. It just means that, okay, this cycle of students might cycle out, but who's still coming afterwards? Who's still continuing the conversation? So that may mean seniors mentoring first years. And likewise, different organizations working together, student organizations, staff associations, faculty associations. So, okay, I'm going on, I'm gonna pause now.
Wonderful. Well, Shawntay, we cannot thank you enough for your model, and Leslie from joining us from North Carolina, and people from all over the region and even outside of Maryland, DC, and Delaware. We're really, really pleased. I cannot think of a more important conversation, and I think that we all have a capacity to act, to take risks, to grow in comfort, but also to grow in discomfort in really generative ways, and keep connecting with others around these vital topics. This is the work. And thank you for joining us. And Anthony, do you want to explain the lineup for tomorrow, or?
I'll just invite you all to come to our additional sessions tomorrow morning from 10 to 11:30 with students and with CCMA and our partners about institutionalizing a Jedi culture. In the afternoon from 1 to 2:30 with a faculty session and a session with community engaged practitioners. And then our closing conversation with Shirley Sagawa from 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock. If you have any questions, please let us know. But thank you, Madeline. Thank you, Dr. Stocks. And thank all of you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.